Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, author of the soon-to-be-released on November the 21st, the long-awaited 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. My shameless plug for my own book. They told me I had to do it, so I consider it now done. But I am very excited to bring you someone you know well, someone you've had in your home, someone you've had in your movie theater, someone you've had on your home television set. Sam Sorbo, author of the newly released school year devotional for families called Teach from Love. Sam Sorbo, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you.
Sam is known for her quick wit, fun personality, voracious work ethic, strong commitment to principle, holds many titles including radio host, actress, international model, activist, author, wife, mother, and homeschooling advocate. She, like myself, is a Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania high school graduate, and she studied biomedical engineering at Duke University before pursuing a career in modeling. You've seen her in Bonfire, The Vanities, and 20 Bucks, Chicago Hope, Hercules, The Legendary Journeys, also Gizmo, published Gizmo, The Legendary Journeys of Auckland, after she married her husband, Kevin Sorbo, director of the newly released, executively produced film by Sean Hannity called Let There Be Light, which is now out in studios and getting rave reviews. Tremendous response, great opening box office weekend. In a limited showing, I think it almost broke the $2 million mark in its first weekend of release in just less than a couple hundred theaters. And I'm just thrilled the projects that you have committed yourself and your husband have committed yourself to, which makes you a great friend of this program, which is all about biblical truth. So welcome to the program, Sam.
Thank you. I'm exhausted now.
You've done it all.
Quite the introduction.
You've done it all. Sam, the journey that you've been on, from modeling career to film, birthed in a family of faith in Pittsburgh?
No, I was raised as a Jew by an atheist. So I left the Jewish religion. I never really had religion, but I walked away from Sunday school around the age of 12 because I wasn't learning anything. And that was my only connection to the synagogue, was going to Sunday school every week, where it was basically just a bunch of girls hanging out chattering. And I was a bit of an outcast, so it just didn't serve me. And I said to my mother, "This doesn't serve me," basically. And she said, "Okay, we tried." And then when I was older, I went on a search to find the meaning of life. Basically, I was successful. I made a lot of money. I had achieved by anyone's standards. You know, I had arrived, and I wondered what it was all about. Mm-hmm. Was this it? And so I went on a search. I did a lot of reading, a lot of research, and I discovered there's order in the universe. And if there's order in the universe, since the natural state of things is to progress towards disorder, I reasoned that there must be an order maker.
Right.
And I decided that his name should be God. So some people use a different name. I didn't see the point, so I went straight to God. And then I started looking for God, and I searched around for a while, and then I asked a girlfriend if she would let me go to church with her. And it was interesting because she had felt uncomfortable feeling called to proselytize, feeling called to evangelize. Mm-hmm. And so she had stopped going to church. She hadn't stopped believing, but she'd stopped attending church because she felt the pressure. But she had recently discovered this church that she liked. And I said to her, "Would you mind if I went to church with you one day?" And she looked at me like, "Okay." And then she looked up into the heavens and said, "If that's what you meant by, reaching out to, So it was just kind of a funny synergy that happened. And at that church is where I like to say Jesus found me. Not that I was ever lost. But.
Right. Now, in getting to know who Jesus was, did that awaken any connection to your Jewish lineage?
There's not much connection with my personal Jewish lineage because I come from a fairly long line of Jewish atheists.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Although I adored my grandparents and all that. But certainly in studying the Bible and in reading about the legacy that's in the Bible and the storytelling that's in the Bible and the history of the Jewish people, yeah, absolutely. The two are they're inseparable. I mean, Jesus was Jewish first and foremost, right? So yeah.
You know, I'll share with you, I came to faith at 44, and I was raised in the synagogue and was engaged and involved in the synagogue. And I lived in Squirrel Hill in the Jewish community, the Jewish ghetto, if you will, of Pittsburgh. It was either Mount Lebanon or Squirrel Hill, and I grew up in Squirrel Hill. But my faith journey, I became more Jewish when I accepted Jesus than I had ever been, even though I had been bar mitzvahed, I had been confirmed, I had embraced my Jewish life, married in a synagogue, raised in a synagogue, lived and went to synagogue. But when I came to faith, it was as if there was the splitting of the atom. It was explosive, realizing that not just this little slice of history that was ancient 2,000 years prior to Jesus, that the entirety of the magnitude of what was and what is to come is fully on the shoulders, fully on the backs of 14 million living Jews that will ultimately, in some way, shape, or form, some part of us will cry for the return of Jesus, and he will come back to redeem the world in its entirety. And that is a responsibility assigned to us, made it something that became so important and so valuable of hearing his words saying, Jerusalem, you will not see me again until you, pointing his finger directly at, there was no Christianity, there was no New Testament, looking at our people and saying, it's we, us, those that were chosen by God as the fathers and mothers of monotheism, shall be the ones that will bring Jesus back. And during this period of time, it is for us to bring the knowledge of the Lord to the world as we are defenders and protectors of the oracles of God. And so here in the fullness of your impact, married to a man whose impact in Christianity is phenomenal, and the fact that your children by law are Jewish, your lineage is by law Jewish, and entitles you to, because you weren't raised in a Jewish environment, allows them citizenship in Israel. It's really quite extraordinary and an incredible blessing. The one thing that's interesting about our people is that whether or not we observe or we don't observe, our hearts are always inclined. Even the atheists are inclined to proclaim that there is no God. There's no quiet Jewish atheists. They're just inclined to deny God. It's almost as if, and I grew up in a family where my father was very much like that. It was almost like, yeah, I'm an atheist, I swear to God. You know, it's kind of, there's no real connection, no real identity in this, but that was a post-Holocaust, I come from a post-Holocaust generation. You've woven this heart that God has given you into a faith journey which is powerful and profound and has caused you to be on fire, creating projects with your husband, creating projects separate from your husband, and writing a school year devotional for families to have an intentional approach to sharing scriptural lessons and scriptures in a way that's going to be lasting and enduring. Is any of this because you didn't have it?
Well, I don't know that it's because I didn't have it. Because I didn't have it and I have it now, I certainly see the necessity for it. The devotional just grew out of, because I'm a homeschool advocate. I homeschool my 3 kids, and I also I tutor a homeschool class 1 day a week, or I did. I've done it 2 years now. And so that 1 day a week, I would come in and I put a godly characteristic on the board because somebody made that suggestion at one point, and I thought, oh, that's a good idea. Let's talk a little bit about a godly characteristic every week. And in this way, we can sort of chaperone children into virtuous behavior. How do you expect virtuous behavior if it isn't enthusiastically promoted? Mm-hmm. I don't think that people get virtuous by osmosis. And in fact, our children in our schools are learning that they are products of accidents of nature, basically, via evolution, and that survival of the fittest is the law of the land. Well, survival of the fittest does not engender a virtuous character. And so, because I'm a homeschooler, I just thought, well, let's try that. And so I would put the characteristic up on the board, like patience, and then we would workshop it. I would say, okay, what is patience? What does patience look like? What are some synonyms for patience? What are some antonyms for patience? And this one day in particular, we couldn't come up with an antonym for patience except impatience. And then one of the kids, so I said, okay, so what does impatience look like? Because if you can't get the word for it, let's just describe it. And it looks very much like anger. Mm-hmm. And it was like an epiphany for me. Patience is the opposite of anger, which was just and the more I thought about that, the more I thought, well, there's actually something to this whole thing. And that's basically the genesis of the homeschool devotional. I put in 72 godly characteristics. I paired them up because the school year has 36 weeks. And as I worked on it, initially it was for homeschooling families, but then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, all the kids really need this. In fact, the kids that go to public school probably need it even more because, they're getting hours and 40 hours a week almost, if not more actually, with after school care and everything, of secular humanist education. And if they go to church, maybe an hour and a half a week, maybe with a little bit of God in it. Because I don't know what the statistic is, but I heard that a woman who had taught Sunday school for 40 years said that she had never once been asked by a parent what they covered that day. So as parents, we send our kids to Sunday school, to kids' church, send them to kids' church, just dump them off, and because we can't be bothered to have them in the service with us, they need to go to kids' church. And then we don't even know what they're doing over there. They put on a VeggieTales and who knows what. So I just, as a homeschooler, this is the way that I approach it. I think that faith, your worldview, informs everything you do, and that there's this secular humanist approach that tells us separation of church and state, because that's how the state can win. And it's wrong, because you show me a politician that makes decisions based not on his worldview / religion, and I'll show you a hypocrite.
Well, you're exactly correct.
Thank you. I like being correct.
The projects that you choose, the ones that you commit yourself to and develop, in the past, much of it has been in the traditional quote-unquote Hollywood world, Now there's so much negativity, and I wouldn't even call it negativity. I would call it reality, truth, revelation, exposure of what people have suspected. Now it's to the point of criminality, uh, and it's been a world that has been around you. I talk to many who live a life of faith, whose faith was a roadblock to them receiving roles or being considered for projects. Have you experienced any of that?
So my story is kind of different. And in fact, some of it's in my other book. I'll just do my own shameless plug. It's called They're Your Kids. This is my homeschooling book. It's an inspirational journey from self-doubter to homeschool advocate, how I became a homeschooler. And it talks about why you should homeschool and how easy it is. And in the beginning of the book, I tell a story. I was on a photo shoot in the Seychelles Islands, which is off the coast of Africa, with a French crew. And the hairdresser said to me at one point, "Don't drink the punch." Don't drink the punch. Why? Oh, we spike it with ecstasy. We want to get the stylist high, but I know you don't do drugs. So I had a guardian angel, or people could just sense it from me, my attitude, that I wasn't going to put up with stuff, and I didn't do drugs. And so I had, in a sense, protection. And for that reason, I don't have the stories that a lot of other young women have, who show up in Hollywood all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and things happen, and unfortunate things happen. I don't really have those stories. I worked. I got a lot of work, and I was very successful. And then I met Kevin, and he was just the man of my dreams. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've hit the jackpot. I have a great career, and I'm going to have a great husband. And then about 4 months before we got married, he had 3 strokes, and he was in intensive care. It was a massive health crisis, and I booked probably one of the best jobs I'd ever been able to book. It was a national network television commercial, which was very lucrative, and it was for ice cream, which was my favorite thing ever. And it shot in New York for 3 days. They had to fly me to New York first class. The whole, this was living. This was the pinnacle, not the pinnacle of my career, but this was a big deal.
Right.
And I went into intensive care, and I asked him if he wanted me not to go, because he was still in it. We knew what was going on. He was being treated, but he wasn't really, he was kind of out of the woods, but not really, because he was still in intensive care. And I said, "Do you want me not to go?" Which put him in really the unenviable position of having to admit that he needed me. And he did. And he said, "Yeah, I don't want you to go." And I took a beat, and I said, "Okay, so that's the compromise." Because I had had a chat with God before I flew down to New Zealand. And I said, "God, what's the compromise? I know I want to get married. I want to meet the right guy. All these guys that I'm meeting, there's always something wrong with them. So now I get it. There's going to be a compromise. But what's it going to, just let me know is he going to be short? Is he going to be dumb? Is he going to, what is it going to be? And then I know, make the compromise and get the deal done, right? Then I met Mr. Perfect, and I was thinking, wow, there's no compromise. This is amazing. And the only compromise was going to be how I was going to manage juggling my career in LA and his career in New Zealand. And 2 weeks here and 2 weeks there. And that was going to be a bit of a mess. But, we can get through this, and we'll figure it out as we go and stuff. And then he nearly died. And full clarity descended upon me in a heartbeat. I said, oh, so the compromise is I walk away from my career. Okay, done. And so I didn't work for a very long time. The story actually continues, because he eventually healed, and after about 1.5 years in New Zealand, I started to look for work. But it turns out the Kiwis don't like Americans coming down there and taking acting jobs from Kiwis, so they basically blackballed me. And then we moved to Vancouver, and I thought, okay, I'll work in Vancouver. Well, the same thing happened, because the Canadians, they don't really like Americans coming up to Canada and taking their acting jobs. And then we moved to LA. When we were finally back in LA, I thought, oh, okay, finally, I'll go back to auditioning. And it was probably my 3rd audition. I came home, and my little toddler Octavia was about a year and a half, came chasing after me with her little finger pointing. No, 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 no. And I picked her up and put her on my hip, and she turned to the nanny and she said, bye bye. And I said, oh, all right then. And so I walked away from acting again for my kids. And I'm so thrilled that I did. And just recently, I got back into it on a very part-time. I don't audition. I don't have an agent. But about 2 years ago, back it up, about 3 years ago, I had an idea for a faith-based television show, which eventually I sold. And in the process of working on that, I met this writer named Dan Gordon, who didn't do the show with me, but I knew him. And so when I had the idea about 2 years ago for this movie, I called him and I said, hey, would you consider writing a movie with me? And of course he said no, because he's a very well-known screenwriter. And, he had just sold a screenplay for $1,250,000 or something. So, but he said, we haven't seen each other for a while. Let's have lunch. And at lunch, he asked me about the idea. And when I told him, he couldn't resist it. He said, okay, I'm in. And then about 2 weeks later, Sean Hannity called my husband out of the blue and said, I want to fund a faith-based movie with you. Do you have anything? So the three of us flew to New York, Dan, Kevin, and I, and we pitched Sean. And half an hour later, he basically wrote us a check. It's really quite a remarkable story. And less than 2 years later, I'm sitting here with a completed film that's in theaters, that's performing. And I can tell you in all honesty, this is the movie I wanted to make. I'm so thrilled with the way it's come out, and the uplift that people are getting from this movie, the hope that they're taking away from this movie, and the sense of joy that they get from this movie. Even though there are tears in the movie, there's some tears in the movie, but overall, it's just an uplifting film, and that's why if you go to the website lettherebelightmovie.com, and you'll see the testimonial videos and all that. It's really an amazing thing that I could be a part of it, because I don't know. I'll tell you honestly, there's only one way that this got done, and I was just a small part of the push, So.
Well, Sam, hearing your story only inspires me more and more that God is in charge, and when we let go of our agenda and we're willing to flow fully in the path that He has us on, that it may not be a year, it may not be 2 years, it may not be 5 years, and it may look nothing like anything that we could have ever imagined. But when it comes together, it is crystal clear that it is God and God alone, and that no man can orchestrate this series of events. No man could take you from intensive care in Auckland, New Zealand, with the man of your dreams on his deathbed, to say no with clarity and conviction, and the most significant part, no regret.
Oh yeah, no. In fact, if I look at the about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, I started down this road. It was probably earlier than that. Anyway, it was basically through my children. I credit everything that I've accomplished in the past 5 or 6 years to the decision to homeschool my children. And that's why I'm such a staunch advocate for home education, because home education it's not about the children, it's about the relationship, and it's also about the education of the parent. We as parents, as human beings, we still have a lot to learn, and I believe God sends us our children to teach us those things. And so when people push back and they say, oh no, I could never, I would kill my child by Wednesday, I don't have the patience. I say to them, maybe God gave you your children to teach you patience. And maybe you're sending your unopened gift into a public institution instead of opening it and gaining from that. The relationship that you get through home education is, and the contrary is also true, that school forms a wedge between the child and the parent. Yes. It's inevitable. And so when you drop your child off at school, you're tacitly explaining to the child, I'm unable, they are better than me, they know more than I do, they have the authority. So when the child comes home at 7, 8, 12, 13, 18 and challenges your authority, it's because you've set them up to do that. And when the teacher sends home the little note and says, make sure mommy signs this, and your 6-year-old comes chasing after you, mommy, you have to sign this. The teacher said you have to sign this. You have to sign this. You are accepting that you are under the authority of the teacher. And by the way, the teacher changes. So the child just gets accustomed to no authority in a sense. I mean, it's not a good system, and we really need to revise the entire system. We've had 9 overhauls of our public education system in less than 30 years. Everyone has not succeeded in what it was set out to do. Now, it succeeded in them spending a lot of money, and somebody's making money. So I would stipulate that it is successful for somebody. Common Core, successful for certain people, but not for our kids in our schools, not right. For the teachers, by all accounts. And yet Common Core was implemented to the tune of several $billion, and it was never tested. So, I mean, because I'm on your program, obviously I can say, not that I can't say this anywhere else, but to focus on the spiritual, you're turning your kids over to a secular humanist environment.
No question, no question. One of the things that when I first got the book, I always open up to see who you knew that would read it or write about it. And one of our friends, Everett Piper, who
oh gosh, yeah.
one of my all-time favorites, Everett wrote a book called Warrior Not a Daycare, and sent the message to an entire university: we don't give you a degree in feelings. If we hurt your feelings, go to some other university. We were here before you got here. We'll be here after you leave. For somebody somewhere along the way left you with the impression that I, as Dr. Everett Piper, the chancellor of Oklahoma Wesleyan University, a religious institution, cares about your feelings. Let me just tell you up front, I don't care about your feelings. I care about your salvation. I care about your relationship with God. But your feelings, I'm not your mother. I'm not your...
Well, you know the genesis of that article, right?
Yes.
The young man that went to church, went to a church service and felt convicted because he had done some bad things. And he said, I don't want to feel convicted. And Dr. Piper said, that's your conscience. And it's my job to actually cultivate that in you. And so this is where we are today. We have a clash of worldview, and Judeo-Christian people are not understanding how crucial it is that we get this right, because there are the secular humanists who maintain that there is no God, that survival of the fittest is the law of the land, and then there are the Judeo-Christians who understand that there is a moral standard that is set by the one who sits on the throne, and that we all should aspire to achieve that standard. We all fall short, but we all should aspire to achieve that standard, that there is a good and a bad. But the secular humanists, to them, there's only a good and a bad per person. There's moral relativity and survival of the fittest. And the problem with that is now they're caught in their own trap with the things that have just come out, the Harvey Weinstein things and allegations and accusations and things that are right. What he did is not wrong on a secular humanist level, because right. it was survival of the fittest. He saw what he wanted, he took it. Sometimes they made him pay for it because they got a bigger bully than he was to bully him into paying. And that's just life as normal with secular humanism. But to the Judeo-Christians, we're saying that's wrong because there's a moral standard that defines right and wrong, and bullying is not okay. So the people that are caught in between, the people who disavow God but still want to hold to that sort of moral standard that they've basically inherited, I call it inherited moral capital, they don't really have a leg to stand on. But they need to be led to understand that there is a difference and that we have to fight for the good because otherwise evil will win. That's what my movie's about. It's about darkness and light and bringing light. There's one antidote to the darkness. There's a lot of darkness around, and there's an antidote, and it's the light.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting that we look at symbolism, and this encroaching darkness, this overwhelming darkness, has no power to extinguish light. And people so often forget that all the darkness in the world cannot extinguish the light of even a single candle. Why we don't see that our entire attraction, we are created not to be attracted to darkness. We're always drawn to a light. You check into a hotel room, you close the blinds, you get ready for bed, you turn off the lights, and what do you see? You see the green, little tiny green light that's on the fire detector, the smoke detector. You see the little tiny power light that's red that's off on the corner of the television set. You don't see darkness. You see these little specks of light because we are designed to seek the light. And this resistance that we see in the world today with trying to advance an agenda of Marxist, socialist, liberalism, every self-identification. If I defined myself, if everything I did was defined by myself, I would look like the platypus. I mean, you know, I always want to ask God, what were you thinking? Was this a spare parts depot? But I think about the fact that if man were to assemble, this is what man would assemble, a platypus. Okay? We don't know the function. We don't even know how to describe it. And we can compare parts and pieces, but in and of itself, what is the identity of a platypus? And we can't give one. And so we've become a society of undefined, unrefined, and people without a vision, which then becomes this ideal that you set forth earlier about the separation of church and state. We've actually created a national religion called human secularism that is now the law of the land, and we've no longer separated church and state. We've created a state religion. We violated our own constitution because you and I having this conversation, I already have the death threats. I'm already, 14 million Jews say I'm not a Jew anymore. They want to get rid of me. They want to strip me of my rabbinical credentials, but now I'm a Christian, as if I became a Gentile. I was born a Jew, but I became a Gentile. They don't even understand the terms they're using. God defined Jews and Gentiles. Some rabbinic organization didn't. Then I got ordained by the Baptists, so then they said, well, look at what he is now. This is crazy. Then I talk about Islam, I talk about the Bible, I talk about all these things, and I know who I am because I'm defined by God, but they're too busy trying to define God to even pay attention to allowing God to define them. You're quite an example of someone that allowed God to define them through a refinement process that wound up yielding a result, which is exactly what we're talking about, which is this book you've written, Teach from Love, a school year devotional for families. And what's interesting, Sam, is that this kind of came out of a homeschool or homeschooling environment, but it's almost as if this is the essential tool that should be on the front seat of every single car, of every single mother driving her children to school and assigning one of the children in of reading age.
Yeah.
That on the drive to school on that day that we're going to talk about boldness and fearlessness, or that we're going to talk about standing strong. And when we pick you up in the car line, okay, we're going to open it right back up to it and say, all right, how did this play out today? And give it the application. And I can see, yes, homeschoolers, great, wonderful resource. I can see lots of families, but I can see that mom in that carpool line that has had a routine, which is this one has their earbuds in, this one's playing on their iPad, this one is trying to hurry up and finish their homework because they didn't do it beforehand. She's trying to figure out whether or not can she make it through the drive-through line at Chick-fil-A before she gets to school, or is she just going to have to send her kids with a shake because she has something in a bag in the back? And what she needs is this. And she needs to learn to teach from love. Dad needs to learn to teach from love. And the children need to learn from love, which is, that may be the cover, but the back of it may say teach from love, but the back of it is learn from love, because that's the byproduct, is that these children will learn from love.
Yeah, yeah. I like that idea. I actually recently started bringing articles in the car with me, and I have my kids read articles out loud, and we talk about politics. Because you've got that downtime in the car, and there's no reason for them to have their earbuds in, ignoring you. If you don't have that much time to spend with your child anyway, especially if you send them off to school every day,
right,
then at least use the time that you do get. So I like that idea, that doing the devotional in the car on the way to school or on the way home every day. What a great idea. What a great idea. I also said it would make a great gift for teachers, because every week we have a biblical story, but every week we have a non-biblical story. And so the teacher, if they're uncomfortable bringing the Bible into schools, because I know that's very controversial, they can talk about the non-biblical stories that are also examples of the characteristics that we're talking about. And every day you have the little story or the commentary, and then there's obviously every day starts with a Bible verse, then there's a devotion, and then there's a couple of discussion questions, so to engender a discussion between the children and the parents, or the children and the teacher. I mean, I did it in a classroom. My child was in the classroom with 11 other students, and we would have these discussions. And I got to tell you, I mean, I learned things from these kids, and they're 12 and 13. You can learn a lot from children, and you can also learn a lot through exploring things with children, because they look at things with a child's eye, and as adults, of course, we can't. So they will open you up to seeing things differently than the way that you would approach them normally, and it's a great blessing. And that's why I just don't understand people. I mean, I get it. We're conditioned to send our kids to school. By the way, the one thing that the public schools have done very successfully is they have convinced us that they are useful and necessary.
Yes.
And that's why when I talk to parents and parents say, I wouldn't know how to do it, I say to them, okay, so you graduated high school, right? No, oh yeah, we graduated high school. But you're not capable of teaching a third grader. No, I mean, I don't know where I would start. Okay, but you're willing to send your third grader, your child, into the same institution that turned out the likes of you. Do you see the disconnect there? That's not logical. You feel inadequate, so you want your child to feel that inadequate. I mean, it's really remarkable. And
it's like Groucho Marx saying,
parents can give this some thought. By the way, my books are available at samsorbo.com. If you know anybody who is sort of on the fence about homeschooling, get them there, your kids, because this is really the definitive why you should and how easy it is, because it's really easier to home educate your children than it is to send them to public school. Let me ask you this. Do you do homeschool? Do you do homework with your children after school? Oh, yes. I mean, they send home tons of homework. Why? Isn't that odd? Doesn't that anger you? If I ask somebody to come and clean my house and they leave me dishes in the sink as my homework, they won't be asked back. The schools have your children for 7.5 hours every day. Isn't it sort of a form of child abuse to send them home with homework to do? And by the way, that puts you at a terrible disadvantage.
Yes.
Because now you're not the parent anymore. You're the ersatz teacher. You're like the substitute teacher. You're like you're the person who spoils all their fun. I mean, it's absurd. People really need to wake up and understand that they've been brainwashed to think that our public schools are the way to go. They are not. We're like 29th in the world now. The United States of America is like 27th or 29th in the world for in education ranking, in the ranking of education. We're behind Lithuania. And that's nothing against Lithuania. It's a great country. But seriously, we're not getting it done. And then people say to me, well, I mean, my kids go to the really good schools. Oh, really?
But Sam, here's what's been perpetrated upon us, which is, in my opinion, one of the most horrific messages of all, is that the public school system and the world at large has convinced us as parents that we are raising children. And that is not true. We're raising future husbands. We're raising future mothers. We're raising future fathers. We're raising future members of society. We're raising future doctors, lawyers, corporate leaders.
We're raising the future.
We are raising the future. And we've been sold and we bought into this idea that you talk to a 4-year-old like a 4-year-old.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
I was on board with that. Let me tell you, I speak 5 languages and I wanted my kids to be bilingual. So I thought, well, if I could just teach them French, but I didn't know how to talk to a child in French. And how do you teach a child French? And I couldn't figure it out. I learned all my languages as a young adult from 16 up. And so I tried a little bit, but they were like, oh, mommy, stop talking that way or whatever. And then one day I found a French girl and I was speaking with her. I was conversing with her in French and I asked her if she would come and tutor my children in French. And she looked at me cross-eyed and she said, why do you need me? You speak French. And it dawned on me that I should have just been speaking French with my children the whole time. But I thought that I had to speak children's French or something. I mean, really, I'm probably sharing too much because now people are looking at this and going, well, she's really an idiot. Yeah, there's a part of me that bought into that whole thing, that just what you're talking about. We're raising children. We're not raising children. We're raising the future. And it's funny because in English, I never spoke down to my children. I never coddled them. I remember teaching my 3-year-old, what was the word I taught him? Reconstituted. We would have the discussion. I'd say, so what does reconstituted mean? And he would tell me, I mean, just for fun, just because it's fun, right? And yet I felt so inadequate to the education of my children until they left me no choice. The school left me no choice. So if there are any parents that I can reach today, maybe it's the parents who feel like the school's really just letting them down. The school is really failing them. Because that's how I felt. My child was in school and I was one of the really helpful parents when he was in 2nd grade, and I was helping the teacher every day, taking the kids to the library, grading papers for her, teaching art to the class, all this stuff. And one day I was helping her clean up after school, and he had turned in 5 book reports, 1 every month, and I'd never gotten any back. And so I asked her one day, I said, oh, by the way, how are Braden's book reports? Because I haven't seen them. She said, oh, not very good. Really? What? You're kidding, right? No, they're not very good at all. Well, first of all, why don't I know that as of the first book report, right? And there have been 4 since the first book report that haven't probably been much better, even though I worked with him a little bit on them. But secondly, like what keeps her from, anyway, I sort of blew a gasket inside. I was like furious, and it sort of smoldered for a little bit. And then I thought, you know what? I'm not holding up my end of the bargain. I'm going to do the book reports with him every day after school. And so we did. Every day after school, he had to come home and sit at the kitchen counter, and we worked together and we did the book reports. And I realized I'm homeschooling. And then there was another thing that happened it became an argument. Mommy, the teacher said I don't have to do this. Well, darling, she gave it to me to give to you to do. So you do have to do it. And I thought, why am I having an argument with my child? Because I've let the school intervene in my relationship with my child. And whose fault is that? Mine. It's not their fault. I invited them in my home. And I realized I don't have to invite them in. So I uninvited them.
Right. This is the same system that requires a parental signature for them to give your child an aspirin, but you are not required to give your child permission to get an abortion. This is the system we work in, Sam, and unless parents like yourself are empowered to take control back, to teach the valuable lessons, not only history, not only math, not only the subjects that meet the requirements to get the good SAT scores, to get the good scores for advancement. And by the way, homeschool kids do phenomenal in college. They are heads of corporations and doing tremendous things because they're innovative, they're less inhibited based on environmental conditions. They become solution developers, not problem seers, and we're raised in a society where everybody points out the problem. It's like these NFL players, okay? You have a point you want to make your point, tell me what you want the outcome to be.
No, they just want the outrage. They just want.
Exactly. Okay. And what you've done is.
You know, I forgive me, but I do argue this, that our education system was developed during the Industrial Revolution. That's why it looks like a conveyor belt. And children are not one size fits all, and they don't fit on the conveyor belt very well. Some do. Some work it out, and they make it work. But the problem is, we no longer are living in the time where you go to college, you graduate, you work at a job, you get a job, you work there for 50 years, you retire with a gold watch, with your retirement pension or whatever. We don't have that anymore. These young people will change jobs 5 or 10 times before they're the age of 30. So we need to be raising children who are lifelong learners, which is not what our school system engenders. And if you want your child to be successful, you have to teach him how to teach himself or herself. And that's what homeschooling is about. It's about learning how to learn so that you can learn anything at any time when you choose to learn it. And that's the exciting thing. And so when you say they're not problem seekers, they're more problem solvers. Yeah, because they've understood that there are 3 stages to learning: the grammar, the dialectic, and the rhetoric, and they can just work through them. And they're not afraid of new things because they understand that the newness wears off right after you begin to work it. And you learn the grammar of the thing, and then you learn the dialectic and how the grammar relates to itself. And then you go into the rhetoric phase where you're capable of teaching someone else. And I would argue that our school system never gets to the rhetoric phase because goodness knows I went to Duke University and studied biomedical engineering, and I didn't know how to teach it. I didn't know how to teach my kids. Do you know what I mean? So, but I will say that I learned calculus when I tutored it. So I did learn a lesson early on that fed into my homeschooling. But I just encourage parents, even if you only sign up for a semester, for the fall semester or for the, let's just try it, which is what I did because I was so scared.
Right.
I was terrified. And my husband was, on board, but he was like, I'm not sure, because he went to public school and he had a great time in public school. I did not. So I was predisposed to finding out, I was predisposed to being open to home education. He wasn't really. So he was like, well, if you want to try it, I said, just for a semester. And I never looked back. And I say that with tongue in cheek, because I did actually try school one more time, because I was so convinced that I was inadequate. And that's in my book. It's actually a really good story where God led me down a path to prove to me that I had been on the right path and that I diverged for a moment, and then I got back on the right path.
Well, we're glad you did, and we're glad you shared the story with us. We've been talking to Mrs. Sam Sorbo, as she lists herself here on the cover of the book, Teach from Love, a school year devotional for families, not just for children. The entire family needs to be engaged and be involved. This is not age specific. This is family specific. If you want to bring unity back to the family, if you want to empower your children to stop being children and start being the future. 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 10, doesn't matter the age, they are part of our future. It's time for us to equip them. Great devotional, great teaching from Sam Sorbo. Thank you so much for being with us here on Revealing the Truth. What a pleasure to meet a fellow Pittsburgher. God bless
Yes.
you and your family, and great success with this movie in theaters right now. Let There Be Light, the movie. Go see it. It'll change your life. We're going to take a short break.
LetThereBeLightMovie.com is the website, so you can find a theater near you.
There you
and
go.
if you don't have a theater near you, call the theater. And also, there's group ticket sales on the website, and so you can bring it to your church or bring your church group there. And I promise you, you will be blessed. Go look at the testimonials videos. We're getting the best responses. It's amazing.
It has been amazing. God bless you. Thank you so much. We're going to
Thank
take a
you so
short
much.
break. And when we come back, we'll be bringing you the next edition of Revealing the Truth. Back.